Excellent. So here we are. It's week number 2 of Family Under Construction. And your family is under construction by God. But we all have to cooperate with that. We all play our part. And today the part we're going to talk about is the relationship between parents and kids. Now, last week we talked a little bit about the 4th commandment, honor your father and mother. And this week it kind of goes the other direction. Parents with their kids. So how to understand kids, and then how to understand too how today's youth continue to change. Every generation's a little different, and every generation has its own specific needs. So first of all, most important thing to understand for parents nowadays is how hard it is to be a kid. How hard it is to grow up right now. The kids here in Yonkers are growing up generally in situations very different from their parents. Even if their parents went to school here, life at school's very different, and expectations on the kids are very different from what they were 20 years ago. And especially if you went to school 20 years ago in another country, your kids are going to school in a situation that's extremely different. Everything they're exposed to as far as the media, the fact that they have music in their pocket, the fact that they listen to 7.5 hours of music every day on average, the fact that they're instantly connected all the time with all their friends, with the good and the bad that that brings. And then as well, the different cultural expectations on them. How bullying has changed over the last few decades. How drugs are that much easier for them to obtain. How the music they're listening to is even more toxic than it was, and it was bad when we were in high school. Life is tough for a kid. There are new phenomena happening. Things like cutting. The suicide rate continues to change, and the circumstances with which people continue to commit suicide change. Eating disorders are much more of a problem than they were. And then as well, homosexuality among the kids is an issue as well, is an issue that continues to evolve and continues to change. It's not easy to be a kid. It's a very confusing world. And the fact that there's this natural distance between them and their parents anyway at this age is just that much more difficult. So for parents, understanding that your kids, even if they're not even in high school yet, are going through a lot more than you might expect. And the kids in 6th and 7th grade are already, on average, 50% of them have already experienced pornography online. They've already seen something. Those facts alone really change the game. Now, if it's hard to be a kid, obviously, it's really hard to be a parent nowadays. It is really hard to be a parent, and that has to be said too. Understanding kids also means understanding that the parents struggle. If you're a parent right now, you struggle. If you're not a parent, and it's easy to judge others' styles of parenting, it's just really, really hard to be a parent, and you don't know what the right direction to go is so much of the time. All right? That's reality. Then as well, it's so exasperating to be a parent of teenagers anyway. Once you're dealing with all these extra factors, honestly, I can't think of another time in history, unless you go to the middle of a major war, where it's actually been more difficult to be a parent, but certainly not in times of peace. Okay, now, does the Bible tell us anything about this? Yes, definitely. In St. Paul, it's kind of interesting. In 2 different circumstances, in completely different letters, written years apart, says almost exactly the same thing. So let's listen to that. The most famous passage is from Ephesians chapter 6, his letter to the people of Ephesus. And he starts off the chapter talking about the relationship between children and parents. It says this, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother." Now he's actually quoting, of course, the 4th commandment, honor your father and mother, is from Moses. It's in the book of Exodus, and it's again in Deuteronomy. And it continues to show up through the Bible as people have to live it out, but then also shows up in different ways in the law of Moses and the Jewish law. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, we get that. And then he adds this. He's keying off part of the text from the Old Testament. We sometimes memorize a shortened version of what the commandments actually are, but in the biblical text, a couple of them have very long explanations afterwards of what exactly is meant. And he says, honor your father and mother. This is the 1st commandment with a promise. Quote, that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life on earth. So, children, honor your father and mother. God will bless that, is basically what he's saying. But then he continues. So he's acknowledging that kids have this major role of honoring their father and mother, and that society actually won't even work if we don't do that. Then says this, fathers, parents, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up with the training and instruction of the Lord. So parenting, what he says is parent God's way. God's way. What does God want here? And then this, do not provoke your children to anger. All right, that's said a little differently in a completely different circumstance when he's writing to the Colossians. So the letter to the Colossians in chapter 3 says this, wives, be subordinate to your husbands as is proper in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and avoid any bitterness toward them. Well, we'll get into that in week 4. Week 4 is the moment when the liturgy and the readings we're going to read at Mass kind of almost force us to discuss this and ask ourselves, okay, what's my marriage like? What is the relationship between husband and wife? And how well are we living out what Jesus wants us to live out, what the Bible teaches us that we should live out, and then as well, if we're married in the church, what we committed to when we said, I will be yours forever and you'll be mine forever. Okay, perfect. Then he continues and says, children, obey your parents in everything, for this is pleasing to the Lord. Just as God asks us to love him as a father, so also he asks children to love their parents. Perfect. Then what? Fathers, parents again, do not provoke your children so that they may not become discouraged. All right, so what was it in Ephesians? Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And then again to the Colossians, fathers, do not provoke your children so that they may not become discouraged. I talk every single week with kids, lots of kids, and so many of them have complaints about their parents. Perfect. I know, just as you know, that many of those complaints really aren't legitimate. That those complaints are simply because you're asking them for certain things that they don't feel like fulfilling. They're assuming that just because they feel more grown up means that they should be treated as adults and have all that freedom that adults should have. Okay, now you and I both know that that's not the case if somebody's not yet mature enough to be out on their own. If somebody's still living with their parents, if they're still going through the teenage years, they're not ready for that. They tend to think they are, but they're not. So I know a lot of the time those complaints are simply not legitimate, and it's legitimate discipline that you're asking from them. But then also, there are many circumstances in which the kids are being exasperated by their parents. Why? Well, because it's difficult to be a parent. It's really difficult. And it's really difficult to know the right thing to do in the different circumstances. Now, if you're a parent and God has given you that gift of children, he will also give you what's called the grace of state. Just as a priest or a bishop in his own parish that he's in charge of, or in his own diocese that he's in charge of, has what's called a grace of state, meaning that if God puts you in that place of leadership, he will also give you special gifts in order to be able to lead the people of God well. Parents have that in their own house. You have the grace of state. You're able to govern your children with enlightenment from the Holy Spirit so long as you're seeking that, and so long as you're seeking to do what the Holy Spirit wants and what God's asking from you. That's something awesome. But despite that, it's not easy. And it's not easy to know what the right thing to do is. And then two, let's face it, we're human. Adults make mistakes. It's not just the kids. We get home tired. You're going to get home and you're going to be remembering some prior conflict. You're going to have a bad day at work. There's a lot of things that you're going to bring to that relationship when that relationship gets rekindled in the evening when you see the kids again, or in the morning when they're leaving for school, or especially in the summer when they're around all the time. All those little conflicts, all those little grudges that can kind of be built up over the years. And then as well, moments where you're just completely beside yourself because you don't know what to do. Well, what is the answer? And the answer is maybe two suggestions. The first thing is a book. This is an excellent book. It's one that Father Lino used to recommend a lot, and I know of 2 ways to get a copy. One is to buy one. The other one is to borrow Father Lino's copy and never give it back, which is what I did. So anyway, this is Father Lino's book, and someday I do have to give it back because I just realized again that I've had it for too long. But this book's called Positive Discipline. It's excellent. It's excellent. Here's why. It says that you can't discipline kids in a purely negative way, creating a lot of fear or just working off punishment, which creates fear. You can't parent like that and then expect the kids to grow up in a healthy way. What you're doing, especially as a parent of teenagers, but even well before that, is you're preparing kids to use their freedom well. You're preparing kids to say, I know how to act as an adult, as a mature adult, in all these different circumstances, not because my parents told me a bunch of rules, but because I've internalized and made my own a lot of ways of behavior that have been reinforced by the behavior of my parents and by the choices that my parents have made in parenting me. So basically this book, just to break it down for you as simple as possible, it has five criteria. 5 criteria. So maybe just ask yourself, okay, is this the way that I normally act with my kids? First of all, when you need to discipline, is it kind and firm at the same time? Because most of the time it's really easy not to be kind. It's really easy to sort of take things out on the kids or make them pay for the fact that they're exasperating you. So is it kind and firm? The key is the and. If we're just kind, well then the kids will walk all over you. We know that. If it's just firm, the kids might not feel that you love them and that you appreciate them. And so that means being respectful and encouraging. Even if the kids don't seem to be meriting your respect, even if they don't seem to be deserving your respect and encouragement, right? Second, does it help children to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of significance, a sense that you love them in the family, a sense that they have a place in the family? They need to know what their place is at school. They need to know what their place is among their friends. But most of all, they need to know what their place is in the family, that sort of connection that there is between us. Third, for discipline to be positive, it needs to be effective long-term, because punishment normally only has very short-term effects. Negative results in the long run from punishment, because there's the resentment, it builds up. I don't feel it was fair is something kids will say a lot. Whether their judgment is correct or not, if they feel that something isn't fair, that'll be a resentment that will continue to build up and will impede your ability to discipline them in the future and your ability to connect with them, and then to come back too and give them the hugs they need, everything else that they need. So far we've done 3. First is it kind and firm? Second, does it help children feel that sense of belonging and significance in the family? And then third, is it effective long-term? Because punishment generally won't be. So what other options are there? Well, the book goes into that quite a bit. Fourth, does it teach valuable social and life skills for good character? For example, your focus is not simply that kids behave, that they not break the law, that they not get into things they shouldn't. Your focus is if the kids are learning to respect, if they're learning concern for others, if they're learning how to solve their own problems, if they're learning how to be accountable and hold themselves accountable and understand that, yes, I didn't fulfill what I was supposed to fulfill. Contribution and cooperation, other life skills. Am I teaching that with this action, with this disciplinary measure? And then finally, number 5, does it invite children to discover how capable they are and that they can get through life's difficulties with their own strength? Because if they're always relying on you, then always relying on you is going to mean that even when they're 18, 20, 25, that you'll be filling out their college applications, they'll be living in your house, they'll be eating food that you paid for, they'll be unable to fend for themselves, in part maybe because there wasn't that sense of, you can do this, here, let me show you how to do this, and then you do it. If it's just easier for us to say, oh, I'll do that, I'll take over, then we end up with helicopter parents, as they're called, because they're constantly hovering over the kids, and then kids who really aren't capable of being out on their own because they've sort of grown to need the helicopter. They've never been shown never been shown that they can be trusted and that they're capable on their own. So what this implies is mutual respect. I need to respect the kids. Sometimes we're very focused on the kids need to respect us, but first of all, I need to respect them too, and they need to understand that, and that we're all in this together. We have different roles to play, and so they're going to honor you, but at the same time, you have just as much of an obligation, and perhaps more, because you're the adult. More will be expected from you. Your obligation is to them, not to exasperate them, to teach them, but according to the Lord's way, and not just simply because I snap, because I've been putting up with so much. This kid has put me through so many things. I snap and I don't have the self-control that I should as an adult to govern the situation well. Then everybody does things because they believe it's the best thing for them in that moment. There's always a belief behind every behavior. If a kid, especially as a teenager, is doing something, it's because they think something. There's a belief there. If you identify that belief and start to understand that every behavior has a belief behind it, you can help the kids, you can recognize the reasons why kids are doing the things they're doing, and then change those reasons little by little. Then we're going to focus on solutions instead of punishment. Sometimes the punishment seems to us the way this should end, the solution to this particular affair. And yet the answer is no. Focus on the solution. How can we fix this? Now that we're in this mess, how can we fix it? And then finally, just praising kids can sort of create in them a lot of pride, and sort of create in them the idea that their success is being praised, and that so that they're going after the success, and you'll only praise them with the success, or you'll praise them for anything. More than praise, something similar but different, encouragement. Encouragement. So there, you're not just waiting for that A to come in, or those high grades or high honors roll. You're not just waiting for that, but you're encouraging every single progress towards something better. So every little bit of progress, the kids know that you're not just there to celebrate every tiny little gain, but you're there to encourage them and say, good, you've got that. All right, you got this. You can keep doing this. You can get to where you want to be. Then encouragement is going to build that self-esteem over the long term, and then empower the kids as well. So that's kind of the basic idea behind this book, Positive Discipline. If you need a copy, get a copy. Get a copy. We'll talk about why in a second. The other thing that I see a lot is that we have very unrealistic expectations for our kids. And I talk to a lot of mothers who are very worried about how their kids are going to turn out, and their kids are 4 years old, 5 years old. They're very worried, and they're hoping, que no se me vaya is the Spanish phrase, right? That all of a sudden this kid is just going to escape and become very rebellious, and I hope my kid isn't the one that turns out to be in jail someday, or I hope that my kid isn't whatever. Okay, perfect, but let's be realistic. All of us who were teenagers messed up when we were teenagers, and we probably did a lot. And you might look at yourself and say, well, I didn't turn out that bad. Even though all that stuff you've been through, I didn't turn out that bad. All right, well, remember, the things you did, your kids will probably get into something like that or something similar, right? There's nothing much more different about them than us, right? We weren't perfect when we were teenagers. They're not perfect now. We had a difficult time. We went through a lot of stressful time. You're looking for your identity. You're trying to discover who you are. You're trying to discover your place in the world. And you've got a lot of friends who are affecting you in ways that they're not very constructive, right? And a lot of and you're affecting others too. And you're believing your peers more than adults, and all the things we know teenage years are about. Okay, well, if we didn't turn out that bad, then let's have realistic expectations about how our kids will turn out. For example, if your kid gets into alcohol, if your kid gets into drugs, if your kid gets into anything else that you can think of that they shouldn't be in, be realistic. If it happens once and it was because of experimentation and curiosity, all right, how can that lesson be learned? How can that be healed in confession? How can things be made up for? Especially when it's things that involve hurting others, like stealing or damaging somebody's reputation, or anything where they have a new responsibility or new obligation to make up for what happened. All right, how can we learn from that, move on, and then tell them, okay, now you've lost a lot of trust from me, but I still trust you to a certain extent, and now you can keep building that trust up, keep putting deposits in your trust bank, and then little by little, the more trust they have in you, the more freedom you'll earn, right? And if the kids can't then fulfill whatever you've asked them, if the kids continue to fall into that problem or a similar problem, all right, well, that's when you need to take a different step. And that's when you need to seek help for them in different ways, whatever the situation is, fine. But be realistic. If they mess up once, you saw it coming because they're teenagers, they're kids, they're human beings, right? You know they're gonna mess up. So expecting my kid to be absolutely perfect all the way through high school, it's just not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. And if you find somebody who's been perfect all through high school, come show them to me because I've never met anybody, right? It's just the way we are. So be realistic, your kids will mess up. But if that becomes a life lesson and then helps them to become that capable person who down the line will continue to make the right decision and use their freedom well, then glory be to God, that's a success story, all right? Another thing, before I forget this one, most of the time the mistake that parents make is this. We spend way too much time, we spend way too little time with our kids and way too much money on them. We try to make up for what the time we don't spend with money, right? And I see so many kids who have this incredible amount of stuff on their phone and things like that, or incredible amount of video game machines and things like that. All right, fine, maybe that's not everybody, but let's ask ourselves, what would it look like if I spent half as much money on my kids and twice as much time with them? What would it look like if instead of buying them all the Hollister and all the different name brand clothes, what if I just spent more time with them? And not always the same things, you know, not just like but we ate dinner together on Sunday, so that's our family time. Something different, something you're not really used to, something that goes beyond what you're usually used to. They want you, they want to spend time with you. They want that more than stuff. And it is an amazing difference that you can see if, for example, you say, okay, let's take a week and not use our phones when we're in the house, or not use our phones at dinner, or something like that, right? It's amazing what it does for the interaction between you. Anyway, that said, look, here's a challenge. Challenge is this. Nobody's born a parent. Nobody's born a good parent. Good parents are people who work really hard at it. So just because you've got kids and just because you're feeding them and just because you're trying to help them, is it as good as you want to be? Are you as good a parent as you want to be? Because a good athlete is somebody who works at it, somebody who studies the craft. A good worker in wherever or however you work, you know there are people that are better at their job than others. How do they get better at their job? Is it just raw talent? Well, a little bit, maybe, but then it's practice and it's being demanding on yourself, right? So what do I have to do to become a better parent? What books could I read? Who could I get advice from? What could I continue to learn and never stop learning? So many parents get to the teenage years and they've never even read a book about the teenage years. Maybe they're depending on kind of things that your friends tell you or the things that maybe you've seen on television, and we know there's a lot of television shows that are just really lousy places to get advice. Okay, perfect. So get good at parenting and maybe challenge yourself. What can I do in this new year? What can I do in this new year to become a better parent? And not just changing habits or changing things I do, but actually studying and getting ideas. There are thousands of books like this, for example. Thousands of books. How could I use some of those to learn better different strategies that help? And let me suggest as well, there's an app that you can get for your phone, believe it or not. There's an app that's called Positive Discipline. It costs $3. It's on Google Play for Android phones. It's on the App Store for iPhones. And it is just excellent because it gives you a bunch of cheat sheets where you get to see a bunch of ideas and you can flip through the different ideas. And it's not too many of them, but it's the sort of thing that you kind of need to study and keep reflecting on, keep going back to. Excellent way, I mean, it's just right there on your phone to sort of say, okay, I need an idea about how to deal with this situation. Guaranteed, you flip through 2 or 3 of these, 4 of these cards on the app, and you'll see right there something that's going to help you, something that's going to help you get through this particular challenge. Anyway, if even your phone can help you be a better parent these days, we're really blessed, aren't we? Because that's just the world we live in. If our phones run our lives, well, hopefully every once in a while they can also help us. So it's hard to be a kid. It's hard to be a parent. Let's try to get better at that all together. That way we can really build our families and keep your family in construction through the grace of God and through the presence of the Holy Spirit in your family. Amen.